Thousands of people have marched on Saturday in Peru against the presidential candidacy for Keiko Fujimori. Argentina has returned to a strict lockdown to curb a new surge of COVID-19 cases. More than 20 people have been killed by extreme bad weather during a cross-country mountain race in China. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. And now we start in Peru, where thousands of people have marched on Saturday against presidential candidate Keiko Fujimori, the political successor of her father, former President Alberto Fujimori. Keiko, who served as First Lady during her father's mandate, faces accusations of laundering money she received for her 2011 and 2016 presidential campaigns. Fujimori has denied all charges but spent almost a year in prison while being under investigation and was only released before the elections. A prosecutor has requested 30 years in prison for the right-wing politician if found guilty. She will face off against the leftist candidate Pedro Castillo on June 6 runoff elections.
Fujimori never again. That's why I come to march, for dignity, for my future, for the future of my children, for the future of other generations. That's why I come to march, because I feel outraged by so much corruption, by so many decades in which they robbed and looted us.
In Colombia, at least 2 people have been injured after 2 bomb attacks against police headquarters in the department of Cauca. Local authorities indicated that an unidentified individual threw an explosive object at the police station in the municipality of Miranda in the department of Cauca. The local government reported that the 2 injured were transferred to a healthcare center in stable conditions. The executive branch of the department will initiate investigations to determine those responsible for this attack. And the family of assassination victims have protested in the city of Cali to demand justice. The protesters demanded the Colombian police to respect human life and uphold people's rights.
And then he looked at a friend who was always there and got to help him. In the video, it's pretty clear that he was helping when the police started shot with the SMAT and they killed my son. But I asked for justice because he was a working boy. He was always working to be able to have money, so that my son would be killed that way. It is not possible. I asked for justice.
In Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro Moros has attended the funeral ceremony of the governor of La Guaira state, Jorge Luis García Carneiro, who passed away on Saturday. During the ceremony held at the Military Academy of Venezuela in capital Caracas, President Maduro expressed his condolences to the family of the deceased governor and also highlighted the achievements of García Carneiro as a former military general of the Bolivarian Revolution under the administration of former President Hugo Chavez, and his notable work defending the rights and sovereignty of the Venezuelan people.
Los patriotas. The loyals, the braves, the patriots, and the revolutionaries are like General García Carneiro, in the altar of our people, receiving their blessings, receiving their love. And I say it proudly, García Carneiro was incredibly loyal to Commander Hugo Chavez. I was moved when the man who was 11 years older than me, and whom I admire so much, referred to me as my commander-in-chief, with great modesty, conviction, and love.
Aquella humildad. Aquella certeza y aquel amor.
In the United States, a legal battle has involved the Onondaga Indigenous Nations fight with the state government of New York to regain sovereignty over the lands. Our correspondent, Brian Meyer, brings us more details in the following report.
1,000 years ago, on the shores of Onondaga Lake in what is now Syracuse, New York, 5 indigenous nations signed the Haudenosaunee Truce and established the world's first modern democracy. But the lake was stolen from them, filled with toxic chemicals like mercury, and transformed into one of the most polluted bodies of water in the United States.
This creek has been contaminated with mud boil silt. There's mud boils just south of here and that were created by salt mining, taking brine from the ground. These are the headwaters of Onondaga Lake. Onondaga Lake is a very spiritual lake to our people.
The Onondaga Nation has a treaty signed in 1794 by the George Washington administration guaranteeing its sovereign right over thousands of square kilometers of land, including the lake. But the U.S. Supreme Court rejected its latest appeal. The Onondaga Nation didn't give up and filed a petition with the Organization of American States Inter-American Commission on Human Rights.
The basis of the Onondaga land rights action are those illegal takings by the state, that they knowingly violated the laws. We filed a petition. The United States is the defendant. We have charged them with treaty violations, with destruction of the land. For indigenous people, land is a living relative, and so they will always fight to get their lands back.
The petition is just one of several tactics the Onondaga Nation is employing to regain sovereignty over its ancestral lands. Brian Muir, teleSUR, Syracuse.
And Benin's President Patrice Talon has been sworn in for a second term. Talon was re-elected in mid-April with more than 86% of the vote in the first round of the presidential election. The re-elected president has pledged to free all political activists arrested during the electoral campaign time. Several opposition representatives were detained before or just after the vote in the West African state.
Before God, the ancestors, and the Benin people, I, Patrice Talon, President of the Republic, elected according with the laws of the Republic, I swear to respect and defend the Constitution of the Benin people, who have freely given themselves to loyal to fulfill high functions that the nation has entrusted to us, to be guided by the general interest and the respect of human rights, to devote all strength to the search for and promotion of common good, peace and national unity.
Mozambicans displaced by armed conflicts in the Palmer region are still uncertain about their future, 2 months after the raid. Hundreds of families are still housed at the football stadium and many more are still arriving at the facilities. The displaced family members have vowed never to return to their home for fear of being attacked again. According to the International Organization for Migration, nearly 60,000 people have been displaced after jihadist attacks in the Palmer region. Southern African regional leaders will meet later this week to discuss how to contain the situation in Mozambique.
I am suffering mentally because I don't have family members here, and physically I don't have enough strength to do this work. But what can I do, since I don't have someone here to help me?
The war is not stopping. The people are dying, being decapitated. It's terrible. People are dying in Palma. We are not living there by choice, but because of the war guns. If they catch you, they decapitated you. They cut you into pieces. It is terrible. It smells terrible in Palma.
More news after the break. Stay with us.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomism. Monday, only on teleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on teleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. Argentina has returned to a strict lockdown on Saturday to curb a new surge in COVID-19 cases. The measures will last from Saturday until May the 30th and will limit circulation as well as canceling social, businesses, educational, religious and sporting activities. Only essential workers will be excluded from the measures. Earlier this week, the South American country exceeded its daily mark of coronavirus infections and deaths since the pandemic began, recording 35,543 new cases and also 7,145 deaths. Meanwhile, the occupancy of beds in intensive care units exceeds 90% in many districts.
We have to adapt ourselves to this measure because COVID-19 cases were rising and it was worrying. If we are allowed to work somehow with the doors open but with customers staying outside, that help us. That's much better than last year that we were not allowed to work in any way.
Costa Rica, one of the first in Latin America to start vaccinating against COVID-19, has suffered a surge in cases despite fast rates of vaccination. The crisis comes at a time when the government is carrying out a massive vaccination campaign, with the third highest percentage of immunized people in Latin America, at 8.6% behind Chile and Uruguay. On May the 20th, Costa Rica has imported 1.4 million vaccine doses from Pfizer and AstraZeneca, with whom it has a contract for 4.5 million doses, and it's also negotiating with China's Sinopharm. Almost 4,000 people have died since the pandemic began, and the country has averaged 2,500 cases per day over the last 2 weeks.
The increase has been considerable. Workloads have increased. The volume of patients coming in daily basis is absolutely significant compared to previous months. There are days when there are basically no beds available or there are no breathing devices available for the number of patients.
And the Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, has been fined for breaking COVID-19 public health rules. Brazilian health authorities filed the case against Bolsonaro for promoting gatherings with no sanitary safeguards against COVID-19. Bolsonaro attended an event in Maranhão state on Friday without wearing a face mask and also blasted the state governor Flávio Dino during the event for imposing coronavirus restrictions. The Brazilian president's office has 15 days to appeal, after which the amount of the fine will be set. A new deadly black fungus infection has surged among India's COVID-19 patients. According to Indian doctors, the infection is affecting COVID-19 patients and those who have recovered from the virus. The life-threatening disease is reported to be killing more than 50% of patients within days. Health authorities have expressed fears that the infection could further complicate India's fight against the pandemic. The country's health ministry said almost 3,800 new COVID-19 deaths have been recorded so far, driving India's confirmed fatalities to almost 300,000.
Fungus cases. We have made it a notifiable disease under the Epidemic Act. That will help us in understanding and controlling the disease by understanding what kind of service we need to provide, to orchestrate the management of this disease.
In Hungary, the government has lifted several COVID-19 restrictions on Saturday, as it announced that 5 million people have received at least one vaccine dose. Face masks will no longer be mandatory in public areas, an overnight curfew will be lifted, and restrictions on the opening hours of shops will be removed. Group sports will be permitted in public areas as well as private events of up to 50 people. Open-air events of up to 500 people will also be allowed. The easing of restrictions came as Hungary has vaccinated more than 55% of its population, the second highest rate in the European Union, using vaccines imported from Russia and China, as well as from the EU. And France has loosened restrictions in a return to semi-normal life after more than 6 months of COVID-19 curbs. This weekend, French people made their way back to cafes, cinemas and museums after pandemic restrictions were lifted. Cafes and restaurants with terraces of rooftop gardens can now offer outdoor dining under the second phase of a lockdown lifting plan that should end in the full reopening of the economy on June the 30th. Non-essential businesses, from toy stores to clothes shops, which had been closed since early April, also reopened last week.
We are really enjoying it, but we're still safe. So we'll put our little mask back on when we get up again, but we're enjoying it because it's still quiet and we're all still well separated from each other. So still safe, but with a lot of pleasure.
More news in a minute. Join us again after this.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, acts as an analysis of political, economic and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on teleSUR.
Una travesía para descubrirnos. Buscamos conexiones perdidas.
No nos queda otra que luchar, porque no tenemos nada que perder.
Realmente es por todos.
Recorremos el mundo con Reportajes teleSUR.
Saturdays. Only on teleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. At least 21 people have been killed by extreme bad weather during a cross-country mountain race in China. The runners who were taking part in a 100-kilometer race succumbed to hail, freezing temperatures and rain in the Yellow River Stone Forest near Beijing City. According to rescuers, temperatures dropped close to 0 degrees Celsius, while the runners wore thin clothing that did not protect them from the cold. The province has been prone to bad weather in the past. In 2010, deadly floods and landslides killed more than 1,000 people in the same town.
This was a public safety incident caused by sudden disastrous changes in weather in a local area. The Provincial Party Committee and the provincial government of Gansu have set up an investigation team to further look into the cause of the incident.
Thousands of Lebanese and Palestinians gathered in central Beirut on Saturday to celebrate the ceasefire in Gaza, seen by many as a victory for the Islamic group Hamas over Israel. The celebration took place in Martyr Square, where people raised Palestinian and Lebanese flags, along with flags of a Lebanese Islamist group. There have been protests almost every day in Lebanon in support of the Palestinians since the violence escalated on May the 10th. More than 400,000 Palestinian refugees are registered in Lebanon, according to the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees.
God willing, under the leadership of the resistance and the holy fighters, we will liberate Palestine and we will return. God willing, this is near by God. Today it is a small celebration to express that we have not forgotten our people in Gaza or the West Bank.
Palestinian journalists have protested in Gaza against Israel's airstrikes on the media. Members of the Palestinian Journalists Union accuse Israel of committing what they described as war crimes against media organizations based in Jerusalem and the Palestinian territories. The journalists also cited the bombing of Al Jalaa Tower, which housed international media offices, including Al Jazeera and Associated Press. The local media association called on the United Nations to urgently intervene and provide protection to journalists working in Palestinian territories.
We demand that the journalists are provided with protection, as they are the three media organizations that are Arab, international and local in the Palestinian territories. The killing of the journalist Youssef Abu Hussein and the injury of more than 100 others throughout the Palestinian territories, especially in Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, in addition to the destruction of a number of journalists' homes, are all identified as war crimes.
And fishermen in Gaza returned to the sea a day after the Israel-Hamas ceasefire took hold, but said the area in which they can operate had been limited by Israel. The sea had been shut off to fishermen in the area since the late month, a measure Israel said introduced after rockets were fired into its territory from Gaza. Thousands of fishermen gathered at the harbor on Saturday, fixing nets and getting to work on their small fishing boats. But they claimed the area they were allowed to operate in had been reduced.
Israeli boat fired toward us at 3 nautical miles. We cannot come or go in deep. We stay close to the beach because we want to earn our living. We are afraid, a lot of fear. There is no ceasefire. They are shooting at fishermen.
Before the war, it was 15 nautical miles. Today, we were surprised that after the ceasefire, they were only letting us go as far as 3 nautical miles. What can we do with this? It does nothing for us. For a fisherman, it is a day by day. If you go on expedition, you may eat. If you don't, there's no food.
And Gaza residents whose houses were destroyed by Israeli airstrikes have demanded their homes to be rebuilt. Gaza Strip residents say they want Israel to rebuild their homes as soon as possible, as they were left homeless after 11 days of bombardment by Israeli forces. Palestinian authorities have started distributing tents and mattresses in the Gaza Strip. The fighting between Israeli forces and Hamas left more than 200 dead in Palestine and killed about 12 people in Israel.
We demand that the person responsible for destroying the houses, which is Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he needs to rebuild them. We are civilians, and it is not our fault. The International Criminal Court should tell him, you destroyed these houses, so you have to rebuild them. It is his responsibility to rebuild them, because we are civilians. A civilian needs to be protected by the United Nations.
Libya and Tunisia have signed an agreement aimed at facilitating commercial trade and the movement of citizens between the two nations. The cooperation agreement was signed in Tripoli during the Tunisian Prime Minister Hichem Meshichi's 2-day state visit to Libya. The PM met with his Libyan counterpart Abdulhamid Beibah, and two leaders pledged to relaunch ties between the two neighboring countries. The Tunisian head of state was accompanied by several government ministers and business leaders, who are expected to take part in a joint economic forum in Tripoli.
We signed today an agreement with several clauses, which aim to facilitate commercial trade and the movement of citizens between the two countries.
We have expressed to our Libyan brothers our complete readiness to stand alongside of them during the rebuilding of their country.
And we have come to the end of this news brief, but remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.